the face with enough force that her head snapped back. Blood immediately began flowing from her nose, spattering her white t-shirt with crimson dots. For one surreal moment, the entire cabin froze in shocked silence. Harold Whitfield smirked. "You hit my baby." Anna's scream shattered the cabin's horrified silence. Her hands trembled as she reached for her daughter, doctor's instincts taking over despite her shock. 7-year-old child. Blood continued to trickle from Zara's nose as the little girl sat in stunned silence, too shocked to even cry. Her wide eyes reflected confusion and betrayal, the look of a child whose understanding of the world had just been violently rewritten. "She invaded my personal space after repeatedly harassing me," Harold declared loudly, adjusting his cuffs as if he'd merely swatted an insect. "I have the right to defend myself." Against a first grader, an older woman from row 3 finally broke the bystander silence. "You don't know the situation," Harold snapped back. "I've been provoked and assaulted since boarding this flight. First with juice, then with that filthy toy." Michelle, the flight attendant, hovered nearby, her face pale. "Sir, please return to your seat. I need to report this incident to the captain. Report that this woman and her ill-behaved child have been harassing a premium customer," Harold instructed. "And find me another seat immediately. The only seat you should be concerned about is one in a police station," Tiana said through clenched teeth as she pressed a napkin to Zara's bleeding nose. Her hands shook with a mixture of fury and fear, the primal reaction of a mother whose child had been harmed before her eyes. "Is that a threat?" Harold leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Do you have any idea who I am? I could buy and sell that hospital you work at 10 times over before lunch." "How do you know where I work?" Tiana asked, suddenly alert to a new dimension of threat. Harold smiled coldly. "Hospital ID is hanging from your bag. Tiana Williams, Chief of Pediatric Surgery. By tomorrow, the board will know exactly what kind of trouble you cause." The threat hung in the air. Between them, a reminder of how power and privilege operated in the real world beyond the supposed equality of the law. In Seat 2A, Jackson Miller flashed back to another memory. His last deployment had taken him to a classified location where he'd seen children used as pawns by those in power. He had sworn then that if he ever witnessed such abuse in civilian life, he would not stand by. 20 years of discipline kept his rage contained, but his decision was made. Zara, recovering from her initial shock, began to cry quietly. "Mommy, my face hurts." "Why did he hit me?" "I said sorry." "Because he's a bad man, baby," Tiana whispered, her voice breaking. "Some people are just bad inside." "That slander," Harold snapped. "I acted self-defense against persistent harassment. She's 7 years old." Tiana repeated, her voice rising. "What kind of monster hits a child?" The co-pilot emerged from the cockpit, summoned by Michelle's urgent report. "What's going on here?" it demanded, taking in the blood-stained napkins and the crying child. "This man struck my daughter across the face," Tiana stated firmly. "Him arrested when we land." "She's exaggerating," Harold countered smoothly. The child licked the toy, deliberately spilling juice on the suit. "I merely deflected her. If anyone should be facing consequences, it's this woman. For failing to control her child in a premium cabin." The co-pilot looked between them, uncertainty evident in his expression. Harold's confident delivery and expensive suit created the appearance of authority, while Tiana's emotional state made her seem less credible despite the evidence of injury. "She has a bloody nose," the co-pilot observed. "She worked herself up into a state and got a nosebleed," Harold dismissed. "Children get nosebleeds all the time." "That's not what happened," Tiana protested. "Multiple passengers saw him hit her." All eyes turned to the surrounding passengers looking for confirmation. One by one, they lowered their gazes, suddenly fascinated by their shoes or the safety cards in their seat back pockets. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted to challenge a man who radiated wealth and connections. Jackson watched this collective failure of moral courage with growing disgust. He had seen it before, the way power insulated itself through intimidation and the complicity of witnesses. He had promised himself never again. But need everyone to calm down, the co-pilot said clearly out of his depth. Sir, for now, please return to your seat. We'll sort this out after landing. I will not sit next to these people, Harold insisted. I demand to be moved. Mommy, Zara whispered, her voice quavering, but suddenly urgent. Hoppy is gone. Tiana looked down the aisle where the stuffed rabbit had landed after Harold had knocked it from Zara's. Another passenger had picked it up, but instead of returning it, had tucked it into their bag, taking advantage of the chaos. This small additional injustice, the theft of a traumatized child's comfort item, was the final straw for Zara. She began to sob in earnest, her small body shaking with the force of her distress. I want Hoppy. The bad man made Hoppy go away. Shut that child up, Harold demanded. This is exactly why children don't belong in first class. Sir, please return to your seat, the co-pilot repeated more firmly this time. Harold stood ground. Either they go or I go. Trust me, I don't want you to make of this with your airline's executive team. I play golf weighted, visibly calculating the professional risk of challenging a seemingly powerful passenger versus protecting a child. Zara looked up at her mother, innocent face streaked with blood and tears. It's okay, Mommy. We can move. He repeated her earlier offer, her voice defeated. I don't want to sit by the bad man anymore. It was this, the sound of a child learning to accommodate injustice, to make herself smaller in the face of cruelty, that finally triggered Harold's undoing. You should listen to your brat, he sneered. At least she knows. Her PL. Harold never finished his sentence. As Zara turned toward him once more, perhaps to apologize again despite everything, Harold's hand shot out reflexively, striking her directly in the face with a closed fist. This time, blood spurted from Zara's nose, spattering across the white headrest cover. The businessman smirked as if satisfied to have established his dominance once and for all. The entire first-class cabin froze in collective. Nobody moved except for Jackson Miller, whose muscular frame rose slowly from seat to it. 20 years of Navy SEAL training had prepared him for combat, but never for this. In the stunned silence that followed Harold's assault, Jackson Miller moved with the controlled precision that had kept him alive through 4 combat tours. 3 seconds. That's all it took for him to cross the aisle and secure Harold in a specialized restraint hold, painful enough to immobilize, but leaving no visible marks. What the hell do you think you're doing? Harold gasped, face contorted with shock as his arm was bent at an angle that promised agony if he struggled. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? Someone who just assaulted a child in front of 20 witnesses, Jackson replied, his voice eerily calm. The quiet intensity of his tone silenced the businessman more effectively than would have. Now you're going to sit down and shut up until the authorities arrive. The cabin erupted in chaotic activity. Passengers who had studiously avoiding involvement now had their phones out recording. Mitch called the captain while the co-pilot stood frozen, uncertain whether to help restrain Harold or order Jackson to release him. Rated combat veteran restraining an active threat, announced clearly, understanding the legal importance of a state's intentions. Law enforcement arrives. Tiara into her arms, pressing a fresh cocktail her daughter's bleeding nose while whispering reassurance. Medical training had taken over, assembled with the particular terror comes from seeing one's child harm. He hit me again, Mommy, Zara sobbed and tears mixing on her small face. I didn't do anything. I know, baby, Tiana whispered, shooting a glance toward Jackson. You did nothing wrong. That man is going to be in big trouble. The cockpit, taking in the scene with the practiced calm accustomed to handling emergency. I need explanation now. This packed child, Jackson stated flatly. The second time with a closed fist. I am restraining him for the safety of everyone on board. He's lying. Harold protested, though he had grown noticeably paler. This is assault. Sue this entire airline into bankruptcy. The captain's gaze fell on Zara's bloodied face, then hardened. We're diverting to Denver. I'm declaring this a level 2 security situation. You can't be serious, Harold spluttered. For a misunderstanding with a child. Do you realize what this diversion will cost your airline? Less than my conscience would cost me if I did nothing, the captain replied coldly before turning to Jackson. So can you maintain control of this passenger until we land? Jackson nodded once. With pleasure. As the captain returned to the cockpit to coordinate the emergency landing, Harold attempted to regain control of the narrative. This is ridiculous. I was defending myself. The child has been harassing me since we boarded. I saw everything, Jackson stated, adjusting his hold slightly when Harold tried to squirm. Every word, every action. I'm trained to observe and report with precision. Harold sneered despite his compromised position. And who exactly are you supposed to be? Navy SEAL, 20 years service for combat tours, specialized in hostage rescue and threat neutralization. Jackson recited his credentials without emotion, but the effect on the surrounding passengers was immediate. Ripple of murmurs and wide eyes. Of course, Harold scoffed. A military thug. Using excessive force. The courts will love that. The words triggered a flashback for Jackson, a mission in Afghanistan where his team had been accused of excessive force after preventing a child trafficking operation. The mission had been classified. The accusations had been false, but the memory of being painted as the villain for doing what was right still stung. I used exactly the force necessary to neutralize a threat to a child, Jackson replied evenly. No more, no less. The law allows for reasonable intervention to prevent harm to others. Michelle approached cautiously with a first aid kit, handing it to Tiana. I'm so sorry, Dr. Williams. I should have. You stood by and did nothing, Tiana said. Coldly, she extracted gauze pads for Zara's nose. Everyone did. Michelle nodded toward Jackson, guilt-evident expression. Harold, his position was weakening. That child was being aggressive. I felt threatened. Black child. She's 7 years old and weighs 50. Interrupted, tightening his hold. Harold. Blood trickled down 7-year-old Zara's nose and smirked. Entire first-class cabin froze in shock. Nobody moved except for Jackson Miller, whose muscular frame rose slowly from seat 2A. 20 years of Navy SEAL training had prepared him for combat, but never for this. Before we dive into this shocking story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to follow more stories of justice being served. Can you believe what happens next when this decorated Navy SEAL decides enough is enough? The morning had started like any other for Tiana Williams as she guided her 7-year-old daughter Zara through the bustling Atlanta International Airport. As the chief pediatric surgeon at Grady Memorial Hospital, Tiana was accustomed to high-pressure situations. Cisco wasn't. For leisure, she had been invited to present her groundbreaking surgical technique at a medical conference that could save thousands of children's lives. Mommy, will the plane go above the clouds? Zara asked, her bright eyes wide with excitement as she clutched her beloved stuffed rabbit. Papa, yes, baby. Go so high you might even see angels, Tiana replied, squeezing her daughter's small hand. Despite the early hour, Tiana's phone had already buzzed several times with hospital emergencies she'd handed off to colleagues. This trip was rare quality time with Zara, who often had to share her mother with critically ill children. At the gate, a pleasant surprise awaited them. Dr. Williams, we've upgraded you to first class based on your frequent flyer status, the gate agent announced with a smile. Both you and your Daughter Tiana hadn't flown first class in years, always choosing to save the hospital's travel budget for equipment rather than comfort. "Thank you," she said, genuinely pleased. As they boarded the aircraft, Zara bounced with each step down the jetway. "Going to get special cookies?" Jamal said. "First class has special cookies." Tiana laughed. "Maybe, but remember what we talked about on the way here?" Zara nodded solemnly. "Use my inside voice and remember my manners." "That's my girl." The first class cabin gleamed with luxury as Tiana set Zara by the window in seat 2B to C. She noticed him across the aisle in 2A. His athletic build and watchful eyes suggested military training, though he wore civilian clothes. He gave them a polite nod before returning to his book. The full moment was shattered when a man in gray approached row 2. Harold Whitfield, 58 years old, with hair and a watch that cost more than most cars, stared at his boarding pass, then at Zara with undisguised displeasure. "I believe you're in my seat," he said coldly. This boarding pass clearly showing seat 2D. "Sir, I believe we're in the correct seats," Tiana replied. "We're in 2B and 2C. Harold's jaw tightened as he realized his mistake. Without apologizing, he slid into seat 2D beside them, immediately pressing the flight attendant call button. A blonde flight attendant with Michelle on her name tag appeared. "How can I help you?" "Sir, I'd like to change seats," Harold said, not bothering her his voice. "I'm not comfortable with my seating arrangement." Michelle's eyes flicked briefly to Tiana. "I'm sorry, but the flight is completely full today. Surely there must be somewhere else," Harold insisted. "Perhaps someone in common would appreciate an upgrade." "Apologize, but I don't allow seat changes after boarding without a valid reason." Michelle's smile remained fixed. Her discomfort was obvious. "Fine," Harold huffed, pulling out his laptop and creating a physical barrier between himself and Tiana. Across the aisle, Jackson Miller observed the interaction with growing interest. As a Navy SEAL with 20 years of service, he had the keen sense of trouble brewing. The business behavior had set off warning bells. Jackson had seen that look of contempt before in wars as beneath him. The encounter reminded Jackson of his childhood friend Darnell. Growing up in rural Virginia, Jackson had witnessed how differently his black friend was treated. When they were 12, a store owner had accused Darnell of stealing by having his arm while ignoring Jackson, who had pocketed a candy bar on. There, injustice had shaped Jackson's worldview and eventually led him to a military career where he could stand for something greater than himself. As the plane taxied for takeoff, another comment just loud enough to be heard. "First class certainly isn't what it used to be. They let anyone in these days, regardless of where they belong." Tiana stiffened, but focused on helping Zara with her seatbelt. Jackson noticed her hands trembling slightly as she double-cheeked the buckle. "That man seems angry," Zara whispered, her voice. "I recommend you stop talking now. The airline will be hearing from my attorneys." Harold threatened. "My family built half of downtown Chicago. We donate millions to campaigns. When I'm done, none of you will ever work again." The announcement system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a security incident, we are making on schedule. Land Denver." remain seated with their seatbelts fastened. Enforcement will be eating our aircraft. A collective groan rose from the cabin as passengers contemplated mixed conditions and delayed plans. Several glared at Tiana and Zara as if they were responsible for the inconvenience. This is your fault. One businessman in row 4 muttered loudly enough to be heard. Some people always have to make a scene. Do you stand Jackson for taking immediate action to protect little Zara, or should he have waited for the flight crew to handle the situation? Comment number 1 if you believe Jackson did the right thing by physically restraining Harold after he struck Zara. Like this video if he would have done the same thing in his position. And don't forget to subscribe to see when this plane lands in Denver with police waiting. What do you think will happen when Harold's powerful connections discover he's been restrained by a Navy SEAL? Will the airline side with the wealthy businessman or the injured child? The plane touched down at Denver International Airport, jarring thud that seemed to punctuate the tension in the cabin. Jackson maintained his hold on Harold throughout the landing, adjusting only enough to ensure both their seatbelts were properly fastened. The businessman had grown quiet during the descent, a calculating look replacing his earlier speech. Passengers, please remain seated. The captain announced as they taxied to a remote part of the tarmac rather than a regular gate. Law enforcement will be boarding momentarily. Through the windows, passengers could see police vehicles with flashing lights positioned around the aircraft. The scene had all the hallmarks of a major security. Completely unnecessary, Harold muttered, finding his voice again. A waste of police resource and taxpayer money. Child has a facial injury caused by an adult, Jackson replied evenly. That's a felony, assault in most states. Tiana sat across the aisle, still cradling Zara, who had finally stopped crying and now rested in exhausted silence against her mother's chest. The bleeding had stopped, but angry bruising had begun to appear across the child's delicate features. The bleeding here, Michelle announced unnecessarily. As informed officers through the forward door, 2 Denver police officers and an air marshal entered the cabin, quickly assessing the situation. What's going on here? The lead officer asked, his hand resting instinctively on his holster as he noted Jackson's restrained hold on Harold. Military extremists attacked me without provocation, Harold declared before anyone else could speak. I've been held against my will and threatened. Jackson didn't release his hold, but nodded respectfully to the officer. Navy SEAL, 20 years service. This man twice assaulted a child over there. The second time with a closed fist, causing visible injury. I restrained him to prevent further violence. The officer's eyes moved to Zara's bruised face, then back to Harold. That's not what happened, Harold insisted, his voice taking on the practiced indignation of someone accustomed to rewriting narratives. There was an accident with a beverage. The child became hysterical and had a nosebleed. This man used it as an excuse to assault. Carrying a quiet cabin. Shoo, it's okay, baby. Some people just wake up. On the wrong side of the bed, Tiana whispered back, though her eyes reflected hurt. Once they reached cruising altitude, Michelle began the first-class beverage service. She served Harold first. He demanded without looking up from his laptop. When Michelle reached Tiana and Zara, smiley, what can I get for you ladies? Please, Zara. Excitedly. And just water for me, thank you, Tiana added. Harold snorted. Apple juice in first class. Ridiculous. Jackson watched as Tiana's shoulders tensed again. He had seen that protective posture countless times in war zones. Parent trying to shield their child from surrounding dangers. But this wasn't a war zone. This was a domestic life in. America. The plane suddenly hit a pocket of turbulence. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged on as the aircraft jerked violently as apple juice launched from her table, arcing perfectly in the air, and landing directly on Harold's expensive suit pants and laptop. "Mommy!" Zara gasped in horror. Harold's face contorted with rage and liquid into the light gray fabric. Ken went silent as every passenger watched to see what would happen next. "You brat!" Harold bellowed, slamming his laptop closed to his feet despite the illuminated seat belt sign. Apple juice dripped from his pant leg onto his Italian leather shoes. "I'm so sorry," Tiana said immediately, reaching for the cocktail napkins. "It was the turbulence. Let me help you clean that." "Touch me," Harold hissed, backing away from her outstretched hand. She carried a disease. "This is a $5,000 suit. Do you have any idea what that means?" "Of course you don't." Tiana's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Sir, it was an accident caused by turbulence. My daughter is only 7 years old." "Well, maybe if you knew how to teach your child some manners," Harold sneered, emphasizing the word "your" in a way that made its subtext clear to everyone within earshot. "But I suppose that's asking too much from certain people." The coated lung in the air like poison. Passengers in nearby rows became intensely interested in their magazines or the clouds outside their windows. No one intervened. No one made eye contact. "Excuse me," Michelle, the flight attendant, said, hurrying over with a handful of napkins. "Let me help with that, sir." "This suit is ruined," Harold continued, ignoring Michelle's attempts. "The same. I have a board meeting immediately after landing. Am I supposed to do no? Show a look. I let a child use me as a cup." Jackson watched the scene unfold, his jaw tightening. The businessman was making a spectacle, but what Jackson more was how the other passengers were pretending not to notice. It was the same enabling silence he'd witnessed in villages halfway around the world when local strong men abused their power. Zara's lip trembled as tears welled in her eyes. "I need to," she whispered. "Well, you did it anyway, didn't you?" Harold snapped at the "So, and now look what happened." "Sir, please return to your seat." "The seatbelt sign is still illuminated," Michelle said, her voice professional, but lacking authority. "Not until I get some assurance that I'll be compensated for this statement," Harold insisted. "That laptop might have been affected too. That's thousands of dollars of potential damage. The airline has a process for filing claims for incidents like this," Michelle explained. "I can bring you paperwork." "I don't want paperwork." "Accountability," Harold said, glaring at Tiana. "I want them removed from first class." Zara began to cry quietly, fat tears rolling down her cheeks as she hunched smaller in her seat, trying to disappear. "Look at that. Crying now. Typical," Harold muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "That's how they always react when confronted with their own mistakes." Tiana's eyes flashed dangerously. "Exactly do you mean by they, sir?" Harold smirked. "I think we both know exactly what I mean." Jackson shifted in his seat, prepared to intervene if necessary. 20 years of combat experience taught him to recognize when a situation was about to escalate beyond words. "I'm really sorry about your suit," Mr. Zara said suddenly, wiping her tears and reaching into her small backpack. Her beloved stuffed with Hoppy, extending it toward Harold. "Maybe Hoppy can help you feel better. He always makes me feel better when I'm." Child innocent gesture of peace offering hung in the air between them. For a moment, Harold seemed taken back by the unexpected kindness. Then his face twisted with disgust. "Keep your filthy toy away from me," he snarled, slapping Zara's hand away with enough force that stuffed rabbit. And flying down the aisle, the girl fell back against her seat with a cry of pain and surprise. "Oh, you dare touch my sister," Tiana said, her voice rising. She protectively wrapped an arm around Zara. "Your daughter touched me with a disgusting little toy," Harold countered. "I want you both moved immediately. I'm being harassed and assaulted." Michelle looked helplessly between them. "Perhaps it would be easier if you and your daughter moved another section, Dr. Williams, just to defuse the situation." I stared at Michelle in disbelief. "You want us to move because he's being inappropriate and aggressive toward a child? I'm just trying to find a peaceful solution," Michelle stammered. "The peaceful solution would be for this man to apologize for striking a child." "Racist language," Tiana responded firmly. "Racist? I never said anything racist," Harold said loudly, playing to the audience of silent passengers. "This is ridiculous. Playing the because their kid doesn't know how to behave in public." As the argument intensified, Jackson found himself transported back to a mission in Somalia years earlier. As he had witnessed a local militia leader bullying a family, threatening them for trivial reasons. His commanding officer had ordered not to interfere in matters. Jackson had orders then, and the families had been burned down the next day. He still remembered father's eyes, silently pleading for help that never came. "I will not be moving," Tiana stated firmly, her professional composure returning. "My daughter and I have every right to be here. We were operated by the airline based on my frequent flyer status, and we've done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong," Harold scoffed. "Uncontrolled child." "Sir, I'm going to need you to release him," the air marshal said to Jackson. "We'll take it from here." Jackson complied immediately, standing back with his hands visible. A show of rubbing his shoulder and adjusting his rumpled suit. "I want this man arrested for assault and battery," Harold commanded, pointing at Jackson. "And I want my attorney contacted immediately." "Anyone else witness what happened?" the lead officer asked the cabin at large. This was the moment of truth, the point where bystanders could correct their earlier silence. Jackson watched as passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Would they speak up now? Would Harold's obvious wealth and connections intimidate them into continued silence? "I saw everything." A woman in her 60s spoke up from row 3. "That man hit the little girl twice. The second time was a punch. I recorded part of it," another passenger added, holding up his phone. "After the first hit, I started filming." Another and another. Harold's expression soured as he realized the type of witnesses was turning against him. Those recordings were made without consent. They're inadmissible. "There's no expectation of privacy on a commercial aircraft, sir," the marshal informed him. "Check the plane security cameras," Harold demanded. "Changing tactics. They'll show these people are lying. Most commercial aircraft don't have security cameras, sir," the lead officer said. "We'll take statements from everyone involved." Michelle said hesitantly, "I need to report what I saw." Harold fixed her with a cold stare. "Remember your employee before you speak, young lady." The implied threat hung in the air, but Michelle straightened her line. "He hit the child. I saw it clearly both times." "This is absurd," Harold protested. "I'm being railroaded because of reverse racism. They're targeting me because I'm a successful white businessman." The officers ignored his outburst and approached Tiana. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened?" Tiana recounted the events with clinical precision, her medical training evident in how she described Zara's injuries. The first was open-handed. The second was a closed fist to her face with sufficient force to cause immediate bleeding and what will likely be significant bleeding. He's exaggerating. Harold cut in. He touched the child. Sir, I need you to be quiet while other statements. The leader returned. He used the moment to access his phone. During the confrontation, he had activated a recording app, a habit from his military days when documentation could mean the difference between metal and court-martial. Officers, I have audio of the entire interaction. Starting from when he first complained about sitting near them, Harold paused visibly. You recorded me without consent. That's illegal. Colorado is a one-party consent. Air Marshal noted. If he was part of the conversation, he could legally record it. The officers reviewed including Jackson's audio recording. Which, passing, Harold's position deteriorated. The evidence was overwhelming. Harold Whitfield, arrested for assault on a minor and battery. The lead officer finally announced, "You have the right to remain silent. This is outrageous." Harold exploded as handcuffs were applied. Do you know who I am? Executive Vice President and Financial. We manage pension funds for half the police departments in the country. Name drop caused momentary hesitation in officers' movements. The invisible power of wealth and connections making itself felt. But they continued the arrest procedure. My attorney will help me out in an hour. Harold threatened as he was escorted down the aisle. And then the real consequence will begin for all of you. As Harold was removed from the aircraft, the captain announced that all passengers would need to deplane in Denver for statements. A chorus of grunts and complaints followed. Thanks for ruining everyone's. A businessman muttered. He passed their row. He passed their row. In the terminal, airline representatives distributed food vouchers and rebooking information. Tiana and Zoe were escorted to a private room where paramedics examined the child's injury. Jackson separated with only a statement, but insisted on staying within sight of the mother and daughter. You're going to need protection, he told Tiana's daughter. You're going to need protection, he told Tiana when they had a moment alone. Men like feeling public humiliation. Well, protection? You think he'd come after us? Tiana asked, glancing worriedly at Zara, who was being distracted by a kind-hearted parent. Not personally. But he'll use his resources to make your life difficult. Jackson explained. I've seen this before. As if on cue, an airline manager approached them with a tense smile. Dr. Williams, on behalf of SkyX Airlines, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the incident today. We've arranged hotel accommodations for you and your daughter until we can get you on tomorrow's flight to San Francisco. Thank you, Tiana said wearily. Also, the company would like to offer these as a gesture of goodwill. He handed her an envelope containing vouchers for future flights. We hope this doesn't dissuade you from flying with us again. Jackson raised an eyebrow at the poultry offering vouchers in exchange for the child's trauma and physical injury. Mr. Whit is right about one thing. The manager added in a low voice. He does have connect to our executive team. They've asked me to convey that this incident could be resolved quickly and quietly. The airline would be very grateful. Tiana stared at him in disbelief. I said, daughter, was in the face by one of your first-class passengers, and you're asking me to manager backpedaled quickly. Not all, Williams. Just hope to avoid unnecessary publicity while the legal process takes its course. I think you should leave. No, Jackson suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't really a suggestion. After the manager retreated, Tina's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then ended the call with a shaky hand. What is it? Jackson asked. It was the Denver police. Harold Whitfield has already been released on bail, she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. He made one phone call on the station and 20 minutes later he walked out. That fast someone with connections. That's impressive, noted grimly. They said he's been ordered to stay away from us. Tiana looked at her daughter with naked fear in her eyes. They were checking into the airport an hour later. Tiana received another call. This one from a private number. Her face grew paler as she listened. Who was that? Jackson asked when he hung up. Someone who didn't identify themselves. Tiana said quietly so Zara would hear. Said if I pursue charges against Harold Whitfield, they'll make sure I lose my medical license for pattern of instability and false accusations. They knew details about my arrangement with Zara's father. They knew where my mother lives in Atlanta. Her voice broke. How do I know all that so clearly? Jackson's expression darkened. This confirmed the suspicions about Whitfield's reach. Don't delete that call. It's evidence of intimidation. What am I supposed to do? I can't risk my career or my daughter's safety, Tiana whispered. In this alone anymore, Jackson assured her. He out his phone and made a call of his own. Devin, Jackson Miller. Favor. Remember the situation Hannah when you said you owed me one? I'm calling it in. Over the next hour, Jackson's phone buzzed continuously with incoming messages. Navy SEAL, he had connections of his own. Brothers in arms, who understood that the battle for justice sometimes continued on home soil. Who's Devin? Tiana asked. Jackson reviewed the information flowing into his phone. Former SEAL now works in digital security. Jackson explained. He's looking at Harold Whitfield and Financial. Why are you doing all this for us? Tiana asked, genuine confusion in her exhausted eyes. You don't even know us. Jackson stood for a moment, watching Zara, who had finally fallen asleep on the hotel bed, her small face discolored with bruising, because 20 years ago, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't look away when someone abused power to hurt the vulnerable. Not in war zone, not home. His own. Again. Jackson read the message, his expression hardening. What is it? Tiana asked. Harold Whitfield, the history, Jackson said grimly. Devin found 3 separate incidents settled with non-disclosure agreements, all involving allegations of assault, all quietly buried with main connections. He looked up at Tiana, determination in his eyes. Then, now, dawn broke over Denver. Tiana sat by the hotel window, watching Zara sleep. The child's face was a watercolor of purple and bruises, a storm of yesterday's violence. Outside, rain pattered against the glass, matching Tiana's somber mood. Hadn't slept. How could she, when a wealthy stranger had demonstrated such frightening ability to threaten her family and career hours? door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Jackson holding a tray of and breakfast. She let him in, grateful for his continued presence. "Any news?" he asked as he set down the food. "Plenty," Jackson replied, his voice low to avoid. "Waking her. I spent the night doing reconnaissance." Military parliament reconnaissance typically involved gathering intelligence in hostile territory. The fact that Jackson used this term for investigating a businessman spoke volumes about how he viewed the situation. Westridge Financial isn't just any investment firm, Jackson explained, pulling out his phone to show Tiana what he was. Mere airline investor with an 80% stake in SciEx. That's why the airline manager was so eager to buy their science with vouchers. Tiana's hands trembled as she accepted the coffee cup. That explains the food on as. The aircraft jerked violently. Zara's apple juice launched from her tray table. Zara's apple juice launched from her tray table, arcing perfectly through the